Hi, and welcome to the Girlfriend God. My name is Kelly, and I'll be your host. So, good morning, and welcome to the Girlfriend God. Today we have Dr. Carla Ionescu back in the hot seat. Carla's been on our show before, and if you want to read about all of her accolades and accomplishments and the kind of stuff that she does, all of that is in the description for the podcast. So, Carla, welcome. Nice to
Thank you.
see you
Thank you.
again.
Thanks for having me again. I feel like our talk should be labeled something like coffee talks in the morning,
Right, right. I actually am drinking coffee, as a matter of
Same,
fact.
same.
Drinking coffee and having the occasional nibble of a pretzel that I keep in my office.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so today we're going to talk about the Hypogeum and possibly the Chauvet cave in the south of France, if we
Mm-hmm.
have time for that. But if not, we can make that another episode. And I wanted to talk about the Hypogeum. So I started, or no, that was about the Chauvet cave. Never mind. The documentary that I'm watching is the Werner Herzog documentary Cave of Dreams, and that's about the Chauvet cave. Have you ever seen it?
Really? No, I've never seen it.
It's really good. It's really good.
Oh, I'm gonna add that. Maybe I'll watch that this afternoon.
It's called Cave of Forgotten Dreams.
Is it a series or one long
It's one
documentary?
long documentary.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the Hypogeum, I guess, both for my benefit and the benefit of, the three listeners that I have, um, where
Hello,
where
listener.
exact I'm not my two worst subjects in school and in Trivial Pursuit are math and ge- um, geography.
Okay.
So where is the Hypogeum,
It's in Malta.
which is where in
Uh,
the world? Where in the
uh,
world is Malta?
it's I know it's near Greece.
Uh,
But I don't remember the countries that actually literally surround it, but it's a
okay.
small island in like the southern part of, or I don't know. It's in, close to Greece and close to Sicily. So it's somewhere there. I was gonna say it's the southern part of Western Europe. Maybe that's correct. A geography person is gonna be like, Carla, what are you doing? Uh, it's a hop, skip away from Sicily, and it's also quite close to Greece as well. So it's right there in that area.
And you've been there, right?
I have, yes.
Did you go as a tourist or as a researcher?
Both.
Both,
I mean, I sometimes go as a researcher and end up being a tourist. Um,
or vice
but
versa, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. So as both, but I spent 2 weeks in Malta. Um, yeah, it's a beautiful island. Uh, and in the sense that it has like a very unique architecture.
Hmm.
I didn't spend too much time on the beaches, although people say they were really wonderful. I did a lot of like temple work and museum work and run.
Right.
Um, I did go to they have like a blue lagoon and like some other lagoons out because they're an island obviously surrounded by other rock formations, and that was real, so that was like a touristy thing to do. And it was really, really pretty. Um, yeah, yeah, it was real. I would recommend visiting Malta at least once in someone's life,
Right.
for sure, for sure.
So, because its technical name is the Hypogeum, is the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni. Is
Yes,
that right? Am I
Saflieni.
saying that right? I
Yes,
butcher all these
that's okay. That's okay.
geographical terms
Yes, yes,
because
yes,
Hypogeum of itself just means what? Like a chamber or an
yes.
underground,
That's right. That's right.
whatever.
So my understanding is that some of these names in Malta have like an Arabic history. Now,
Hmm.
I'm not an expert in Maltese history, like early Neolithic history of temples, maybe a bit more, but the Maltese history. So Malta is like a combination of sort of Arabic
Hmm.
culture and European culture. And Maltese is like, is close to maybe Italian and Portuguese, but also uses some Arabic words. That's my
Hmm.
understanding.
Okay.
Some people say maybe there's a bit of Persian in there. I'm not 100% sure. So I think that's why a lot of these names have the hal something in them. So you see that kind of history to it.
Right. Right.
But the Hypogeum itself, I mean, is so ancient that it's in the Neolithic era. Like
Right.
it's before any of these cultures identify themselves. It's
Right.
just so
And
ancient. Yeah.
it's enormous, right? Or
It's
is it?
we're told that it's 5 feet, sorry, 5 floors into the earth. You can only visit 2 floors.
Right.
And they're very, so you can only go 5 people at a time.
Hmm.
And so per day they do, I think you're in there for half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. And so they only allow like 20 people per day.
Hmm.
So you can imagine the lineup to get in. So like if you want to go to Malta next year, you want to book the Hypogeum from now,
Right. Right.
right? But because I went during the pandemic, there was nobody there. There's nobody there. I did have a couple of other people with me, and I think there was 3 of us. But I mean, that's
Right. Right.
nothing. And so they're very, so they don't allow a lot of people to come in because like our bodies and breathing and like perspiration, even just
Right.
natural sort of affects the inner workings and affects there's drawings on the walls.
Right.
Um, and so they even have like a very they have a stainless steel path. So with a like with kind of like a sidebar. So you
Hmm.
do not come off this path. You do not touch any, like there's so there's a security guard that comes in with you every
Hmm.
time. They're very, and the path takes you a little bit throughout and takes you back, and that's all you can do. You can't. So you can see the holes kind of like as they're digging down below. I
Hmm.
think they found 5 floors. It might be deeper. I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah, I read that they really don't know
No.
how deep it goes.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is, I assume, started as like a natural, it's a natural stone structure as a result of weather and water and
I don't think that they know how it started because it's not a cave. So it's in the middle of the city. I
Mhm.
almost didn't find it. There is a small building, small square building on top of the site, and
Right.
then it's surrounded by houses. In fact, how
Right.
they found it was by
That,
accident,
that's what I was
right?
just gonna say. That's what I read.
Yeah. So usually you expect like a cave entrance and then
Hmm.
it kind of descends into this. But this is not in a mountainous area. This is nothing. So literally, let's say 5,000 years ago, they dug right into the ground, flat ground, and they
Right.
dug right into the ground. And then they just stepped down and they kept digging and then they stepped down. So it looks like it's man-made or human-made,
Right.
you know? So there's nothing natural that kind of seems to explain why they chose this site for
Right.
any reason. Yeah.
So I read about so one of its features, I guess, is what do they call it? Uh a speaking chamber where they have it's a large cistern and uh this website described it as a holy of holies surrounded by embryonic chambers
Yep.
where if you whisper into the wall,
Yep.
it reverberates and
Yep. Yep. Yep.
like
It's fascinating.
how did they know that? How did they know
It's
that that would
fascinating.
work?
It's fascinating.
There's
So you're not allowed to take pictures
right.
and you're not allowed to film, to my
Right.
devastation, you can imagine. Uh you can buy pictures, of course you can.
Right.
And you can find some pictures online, which are like a small kind of version of it. But anyway, but you can see, yes, you can see that the Holy of Holies is literally in that style of Neolithic Maltese temples, or what we call like Turksian temples.
Right.
Um, so it's like that's kind of straight line. I don't know. It looks like like a Japanese torii gate. the straight at the top and straight sides.
Right.
So you can see that it's polished and smooth. Like, it's stunning work. It looks like people worked a very long time in it, and you're digging into raw rock.
Right.
So yeah, so that's the Holy of Holies, and then there's other sections of it that are similar. So people believe that this is where the temples and the prayers and the rituals took place. So
Right.
this whole thing is almost like a city, which is incredible. A city of the dead, let's say.
Right. And I read that the first like they initially discovered 7,000 skulls, but those initial 7,000 skulls kind of nobody knows where they are.
They never said anything about skulls, to be honest, when I was down there. They give you a headphone and a thing that speaks to you.
This says, okay, so this website says it was public knowledge that until 1985, a number of skulls found in prehistoric Maltese temples at, oh, this isn't in the Hypogeum, or maybe it is. Maltese temples at Taxion,
Yeah, Taxion.
Gigantia,
Yep.
and House,
Safini. Yeah.
yes, that were exposed in the Archaeological Museum in Valletta. They have since disappeared without a trace, along with the 7,000 from the Hypogeum.
Interesting.
Yeah. Only the photographs taken by the Maltese researcher Dr. Anton Lifsud and his colleague Dr. Charles Savona Ventura remain to testify the existence of the skulls and prove their abnormality. I can't believe you didn't know any of this. Um,
No.
yeah, so the skulls show a particular abnormalities and or pathologies, sometimes inexistent cranial knitting lines, abnormally developed temporal partitions, drilled and swollen occiputs as following recovered traumas, but above all, a strange, lengthened skull, bigger and more peculiar than the others, lacking a median knitting. The presence of this finding leads to a number of possible hypotheses and consideration of other finds of similar skulls from Egypt to South America. This
Mm.
particular deformity, unique in the panorama of medical pathology referred to such distant times, approximately 3000 BC, could be an exceptional discovery.
That's
The,
interesting. I've heard of those abnormal skulls in Egypt and South America, but I did not know about this, which is interesting because I've been to every temple,
mhm,
and I just showed you this book that I'm reading right now. I wonder, and so this book is by the Maltese government.
mhm,
Well, not government, archaeological academics.
right,
um on the temple. So I'm gonna see. I've just started. I bought it when I was in Malta, but I haven't read it.
right, right,
It's literally like boring archaeology depictions, which I love.
right.
Um, but just
So
skimming
the
through it, I'm
right.
skull conversations.
The article that I'm reading to you from is from Hera magazine, which is a magazine in Italy, and
Yeah.
the article was published in 1999. And it
Oh,
has excerpts of a research article that appeared in National Geographic magazine in 1920.
oh, maybe you can send me that link later because
I will.
I'm gonna do this little mini series on the temples there.
Hmm.
Like I was telling you that I have all that film.
Hmm.
But it's fascinating that the sort of book of expertise that I've got here doesn't say anything about these skulls. So that will be an interesting take. I can't say I haven't read it, but just skimming through it, like there's images, there's measurements, there's like everything you would want in an archaeological collection,
Right.
but nothing about skulls, which is really, really interesting. So
Well, it goes on to say that the skulls were all found where there was a sacred well dedicated to the mother goddess, and also where the small statues of the sleeping goddesses were found.
Yes. So that's interesting because they did say that there were bodies found
Right.
covered in red.
7,000, according to this
Yeah,
article.
I don't remember the number, but they did say that they did find skeletons covered in red ochre, and that the sleeping woman was found in one of these burial sites.
Mhm.
So, but I went to the Archaeological Museum in Malta, which is really cute and great. But none of these bodies or skulls or bones are there.
Right.
At least not for people to see. So that's really an interesting mystery, I think, that we might have just little uncovered here. Um,
So this is so fascinating. This natural lengthening of the cranium,
yes.
right? That's the anomaly. It says it is proposed on the basis of these findings that the group of skulls found in the Hypogeum were representative of a group of peoples who were considered of importance, as attested by the location of their discovery, and who had a natural genetic tendency for these elongated skulls.
Hmm.
And they were integrally involved in the activities of the temple builders of the time. Other skulls found in the Brocktorf circle, which is the second level of the
Yeah.
Hypogeum,
Mm-hmm.
are considered to have had their heads bandaged in order
That's
to
right. I've
produce
heard
this
of that
cranial
ritual as
deformity.
well.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah, I've heard of that. So when babies are born, because their skulls are so soft, they do
right,
wrap them with like a bandage. It looks like a bandage to elongate their skulls.
right,
I think there's still some practices of that in some tribes even today. Um, so I have heard of that. So that's just like, let's say, a normal baby,
right, right.
human baby, whatever, that can happen to. Yeah.
So the thing from that National Geographic magazine in 1920, uh it doesn't say who said this, but some researcher or the journal article like author said, from an examination of the skeletons of the polished stone age, it appears that the early inhabitants of Malta were a race of long-skulled people of
Interesting.
lower and medium height, skin to the early people of Egypt, who
Yes.
spread westward along the north
Yes.
coast of Africa, when some went to Malta and Sicily,
Yes.
and others to Sardinia and Spain.
Yes. Actually, that's funny that you say that because that's my next stop this summer is Sicily and Sardinia. But the Maltese even today will say that at some point, so they built these massive temples, they built these beautiful structures, and then they all left. They
Yeah,
just left. And some of them, like people say, a lot of them went to Sicily, and then of course spread out further. But there's no, like, historians are like, there's no that either there was a drought maybe,
mhm,
or something happened, is an unexplainable moment when they all just left and abandoned all of these sites. So these sites are megalithic, like
right,
there is no explanation on how they were built,
right,
right? They're still mysterious, which is why I love the some of the videos that I've taken of the sites, because you're like looking at a rock 3 times my height, and about 10 times my width. And then not only do they have all these pieces of rocks, which people are like, where do they even get these rocks? Because
right. It's like Stonehenge,
yeah, Malta doesn't
right?
just have like rocks lying around like that,
Right.
you know. And then how do they get them there? So how do they get them there? How do they place them up top? Because again, they really like this square, kind of like Stonehenge, this squarish, like the gate and the top.
Right,
That's their style as well.
right.
And it's like,
And
how did they do it?
and the and speaking of Stonehenge, isn't the Hypogeum also strategically placed so that the sun
Yes,
shines
that's
to
right.
like the darkest regions of the cave?
Oh, I don't know about that. No, the temples themselves, the Tarshian temples, yes.
Hmm.
The Hypogeum, I don't think there's any light that's supposed to go in there. No, this is a place of darkness.
Okay.
Yeah, total dark. I mean, candles, obviously there's evidence that there was candles and fires there,
Right.
obviously. But my favorite part about it was the idea that these people worshipped and ate and celebrated next to their dead.
Right.
So like their dead
Right.
are in these embryonic pockets covered in
Yes.
red ochre, which of course has so much symbolism uh,
Right.
of life and rebirth and all these things. On the ceiling of some of the rooms, they have the circular, the circular, you see them everywhere in Malta. They have like these circular paintings in red ochre. It's just like a whole ceiling of like spirals and circles. It's really cool.
Right. And this article talks about that, and it says that the original excavation, or I'm sorry, the 1990 to 1992 excavation suggested that there may have once been a monumental structure that was directly on top of
On
it,
top of it,
above ground.
yeah, could be to identify it at least, if not anything else.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because now when you walk in, you just take some stairs down into the structure, so there's nothing on top.
Right.
Yeah.
So this says, under a heading called Archaeoastronomy, the
Okay.
Holy of Holies within the heart of the Hypogeum was designed so as to be illuminated by the annual winter solstice sunrise, which
Interesting.
would have originally shone through the entrance and directly onto the furthest parts of the underground complex.
Interesting.
Who's
That's
the researcher now, Carla?
uh, that's not anywhere. I mean, it's not possible right now because there's like a box on top of it. So there's
Right,
no way
right,
but it's again not something that they bring up in the information. They do bring it up for the temples that are standing on top of the ground that
right,
you can go visit. But for this one, very, very interesting because the way that you go down into this like cave space, whatever
right.
it is, it would have had to been really open or open in a certain way. Like that, I would have loved to have seen whatever was on top of it that sort of allowed that sun ray to come in.
Right.
This in this modern box, there's no sense at all of light. None. And like I said, you're not even allowed to take a picture or video or use any like nothing. Like you can't.
Right. Well, that's all
Yeah.
for
That's
conservation and
conservation. Yeah, exactly.
preservation and
Yeah.
um yeah, I know a little
And
bit
you're not
about
allowed to
that.
walk into the Holy of Holies like you see it,
Right, but you can't go
but
in there.
you can't walk around. No, you can't walk around. No.
So essentially the entire structure of the Hypogeum
Yeah.
is a ritual space
Yes. 100%. But
because
it's
it
a
was
ritual space that includes like a burial ground,
right, that's what I was going to say.
which is
So
interesting.
funerary rites are
Yes.
kind of a ritual. Sorry, that
It's
was telling me to take my pills, which I've already done. So
You're ahead of the time. Yeah, it's really fascinating because I think it's one of the few sort of sacred spaces, at least that come to mind to me right now, where the dead are with you, literally just
right,
lying there,
right,
or in pockets lying around you, bones collections over bone collections over bone collections, tombs of families and kin. And then you're performing the rituals either next to them or just above them. It's really fascinating. And what's really fascinating is the other temples. So there's three sacred sites in Malta that are these Neolithic three major sites, anyways.
right,
Uh, they don't have a subterranean aspect to them
right,
at this level. So again, there's something very mysterious about the Hypogeum as well, because it seems to be a unique, at least as far as they found, a unique structure, even on the island itself. They don't have any other deep, I don't know, subterranean temples like this. the
Right.
only one. Yeah.
Right.
So it's fascinating.
So if I were incredibly wealthy and could travel around the world, I've also always wanted to go to the Sedlik ossuary in the Czech Republic.
Okay.
Do you know what that is?
No, never heard of it.
So the Sedlik ossuary, it's in Czechia.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big tourist attraction, and
Okay.
it's a Roman Catholic chapel, and
Okay.
it's beneath the Cemetery Church of All Saints,
Okay.
and it's part of the former Sedlick Abbey.
Okay.
And the ossuary is estimated to contain the skeletons of between 40 and 70,000 people.
Interesting.
And so it's decorated,
With
the
bone.
whole structure and all of its decorations is made up entirely of human skulls or human bones. It's
Wow.
a big tourist attraction. People come from all over the world. You might want to put that on your list.
I think I'm gonna add it to my list. That's crazy. So I mean, obviously, so I've been to some actually. There's a few catacombs. There's one catacombs in Malta, St. Paul's catacombs that I went and walked through, all by myself, which was quite an experience.
Right,
I posted a video of that on my IG, and people went nuts. They were like, "Oh my God, it's just creepy." Now, there's no bones in there at all. They cleared all the bones from
right,
there.
right,
But what you see is like the holes where the bones in the families rested. I don't know
right,
what they did with those bones, but because again, I went through because I went in the pandemic, there was no one there, no one, just me. And they have sensor lights. So if you're inactive for a while, they turn
mhm,
off and then they'll turn on when you walk. So it's a maze. It's like a labyrinth underneath the ground. So I would walk around and then I would get stuck in some places because they'd be so tight and tiny.
right,
So then I'd be like, and then like part of the labyrinth would turn off because no one's over there.
right,
And then I was like, shit, like, which way do I go to get out of here?
right.
Anyways, lucky for me, I videoed the whole thing and I posted it on my IG, and people were like, oh my God. Because sometimes when I travel by myself, when I record things, it's like having people with me, you know?
Right, right,
Right. So like I'm talking to myself, but like I feel like I'm talking to people.
right, right.
So you can hear
Well,
me
you
going,
are, you just can't see them, right?
you can hear me going, shit, which way am I gonna go now? Shit, am I gonna fit through here? So I know that there are obviously there are catacombs there, and I know there are catacombs in Paris and in Rome and other places, but that ossuary sounds interesting just because this idea of decorating the place with people's bones is so, I don't know, it seems sacrilegious, you know?
Yeah, but it was like they commissioned somebody to do
Wow.
it. Yeah, that's fascinating. Like I said,
Yeah,
if I could go to
fascinating.
all places in the world, and that's in, more recent history.
Yes. Yes.
It's not ancient history.
Yes.
So the very first episode of your podcast that I listened to, and I don't remember what the name of the episode was, but it was about the cave
Yep.
and womb symbology and all of
Yes.
those things.
Yes.
And you said, and I have actually quoted you in my conversations, my spiritual conversations with other people, because you said that whatever cave it was that you were talking about, um, that when it was first discovered, they thought they built it underground because above ground was like inhospitable or something. But then when they did more research, they realized that no, it could have been above ground, it would have been fine. And they
Yes.
built it underground on purpose because, and this is what you said, they knew that silence and darkness were necessary components to make contact with the divine.
Yes.
You're like, I said that, really? Yeah, that's pretty good, right?
I'm like, wow, that's good. And I agree 100% with
Right.
myself.
It's true. I mean, I meditate a lot and I don't always have darkness because sometimes I meditate with my eyes open and I'm looking at nature because it's such a pure representation of the goddess that I pray to.
Hmm.
Um, but sometimes I do it in the dark, like if I'm
Yeah.
in a dark place and I have to have quiet. I gotta have
Right.
quiet. I used to be somebody who I could really only meditate with guided meditations.
Right.
Now I find guided meditations distracting and I would rather just sit. Now it's
Interesting.
the opposite. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I
I mean,
never,
yeah.
because guided meditation taught me how to kind of quiet the mind, right?
Yes.
But once I understood how to do that and it became a working part of my spiritual life, I started to prefer doing it with nothing. And I
Yeah.
just listen and I listen for that voice in my head that I clearly identify as her.
Right.
And I listen, and sometimes that's not a voice. Sometimes it's me sitting and hearing the rain or the wind in the leaves in the trees, or like now it's fall and there's leaves covering the ground, and like outside in the front of our house, it's all orange and gold and yellow and you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I just listen because I never know when it's going to be a voice in my head, right? So I got to
Right.
pay
Right.
attention. I got to
Yeah. Yeah.
be
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
singularly focused to be able to hear that voice. And yeah, so anyway, that really resonated with me when you said that, and that's when I became hooked on your podcast, and then I started stalking you on the internet, and here we are,
Here we
right?
are.
um, so when you're in the Hypogeum,
Yeah.
how many people were you in there with?
Three other
Four,
people.
three other people?
Yeah.
And did it feel, I don't know if there's an accurate way to say this, did it feel sacred? I mean, I often find that when I'm in what I know is or was a spiritual place, it feels holy. You know what I mean? It feels sacred.
It's interesting that you say that because I wrote a whole thing on it that I'm putting in this travel book that I want to publish on
Hmm.
mostly on Artemis travel, but I'm going to add the Hypogeum because it's such an experience. Um, okay, a few things occurred to me. Number one, I was breathing in the dust and particles of still dead people and ancient rituals and remains because no, I mean nobody's in there sweeping it out or cleaning it out really.
Right, right,
That that really I don't know how to put it into words, but it was this idea of a cycle where you're breathing in the dead as a living being and sort of taking that with you,
right,
and you become one. And so there was a very, I don't know if it's spiritual, but it was definitely like metaphysical. It was definitely more than just who you are. There was definitely
right,
sort of
right,
a, and so yeah, because in a sense it feels it's a weird feeling because in a sense it's a burial site and a celebration and a festival and a sacred site. So
right,
it is a bit overwhelming, like, and the age of it is weighs on you. Like the air inside also is moist and old because they don't air it.
right, right,
They air it very, very, so that they can preserve it. So it occurs, I don't know if someone said it or it occurred to me that we're breathing in the old stones and the old dust and stuff like that. So I would say yes, I would say that there is definitely something more than something more there. You can sense that there is an age to the place and a sacredness to the place and a quietness, and it's
mhm,
dark. So there are a few fluorescent lights on the ground, just so you could see like where you're stepping, but it's still dark, you
yeah,
know. And there's a few places just to eliminate some things for you, but it's still dark. So yeah, so I would say that it still has an echo of the old, and I mean, it's 5,000 years old.
yeah,
5,000 years old,
yeah,
it's overwhelming, like for the brain to really consider that 5,000 years ago, people were celebrating here and burying their dead. 5,000 years later, there's people walking around, admiring that work. you have these moments of awe, I think, sometimes when you're in places. It's my favorite thing about visiting sacred spaces.
Right.
Um, is
That's why I have a theory that that archaeologists and anthropologists are all secretly very spiritual people
mm,
because they spend their lives having experiences like
you're
the one you
right.
just described.
You're right. You're right. And not
Yeah,
all places have those vibes,
right,
but there's some places that have specific energies for sure, where
right,
almost you could be like, I can see why they picked this place.
right,
Because if I can feel it, they probably felt it, as you know, the ancients were much more connected to their intuition
right,
and the cosmic world. So if I can feel it, they certainly felt it. And
right.
then they built on that, you know? So yeah.
I mean, I've even had that experience, and I like to, whenever we travel by car,
Hmm.
if there's an old cemetery somewhere, we're stopping there to go
Hmm.
check it out. And the
Right.
older and more unkempt it is, the better.
Right. Right.
So when we go to cemeteries, and I used to take a lot of black and white photography in cemeteries like that, and I was often alone,
Mm,
right? And so with these cemeteries that go back to, I don't know, when they started making cemeteries late 1700s, early 1800s,
yeah. Yeah.
which, in a way I don't like because cemeteries are a huge waste of green space on the
Yep.
planet, but
Agreed.
it is what it is.
Yep.
But there's definitely a palpable energy to that. And in cemeteries like that, particularly because disease was so rampant, there are often several grave markers in a group of very young children.
Hmm.
And the energy of the grief that was expelled in those places. I mean, you can feel that. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? But
Yeah.
that's also, cemeteries are also reflective of people who believe that when they die, they go to heaven and that there's nothing else. So of course they're going to
Yeah.
grieve, right?
Right. It's true.
And
It's
then you've got
true.
people like me who I'm like, I can't fucking wait to see what happens next because there's
Right.
thousands of possibilities.
That's right.
Um, but yeah, cemeteries, I think in general, they obviously they hold a lot of grief, and that is a very palpable
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah.
And the energy of, what people would call ghosts, which is that, that tangible feeling of unresolvedness, right?
Yeah.
Conflicts unresolved, lives
Yeah.
unlived, all of
I
that.
mean, I've never had ghosts. I've never had like I sometimes wonder if I'm just not open to it or I'm just one of those people where I don't feel the presence of like yeah, ghosts or spirits.
Right.
I love being in cemeteries. I love it, but I've never felt I think it's probably easier to feel the grief of a place like you explained rather
Right.
than ghosts for me. Like some people are very sensitive to spirits and they could really,
I've been trying to have supernatural experiences my whole
yeah,
life and it hasn't.
yeah, it's not happening for me either.
It's not
Not
happening.
happening. Yeah. So it's possible we're just programmed in a way that's like that is not your role. You're not there to see that.
So there we go. My screen went blank because I moved the mouse. Just a second.
I mean, cemeteries and the Hypogeum, I think, are connected still, obviously,
Yes,
uh,
yes,
as burial sites. But it's interesting because different ancient cultures, just like today, different cultures have different treatments of their dead.
right,
Um, I think the red ochre part is quite interesting and unique. Putting like painting or the bones in red ochre, that's kind of cool because
right,
that implies that you leave your dead down there for a while, obviously for the body to decompose, and then you come back at some point and pour the red ochre or paint them in red ochre. So
right, right,
it implies like a connection to the organic body that is also interesting and unique,
right.
you know?
And and you've talked about this in your podcast before that, we often don't um give ancient cultures enough credit, right? Like we
Right.
think it was all primitive and a daily fight for survival, but
Right.
things like cave paintings, painting is a leisure activity.
That's right.
So they didn't spend all of the time running from lions or whatever,
Right.
you know what I
That's
mean?
right. That's
Um,
right.
and it would take time to build tools from
Yes.
stone and bone and,
Yep.
later iron and
Lots of time. And the structures, uh, I can't imagine the amount of work, design, prep, build. Like that's something that you do usually when you are eating well and drinking well. You know what I'm saying? Like that,
right, right.
you have those necessities covered in order to build these megalithic sites, whether they're in the ground or above ground. It's a lot of time and dedication, right? So they certainly had, and there are these lines in the ground. I can't remember what they're called in Malta that are also very unique. They're like, they look like railroad lines. I don't know if, yeah, you have your computer in front of you. There's a name
Yeah,
for them. I think it's something with a C, Carthic lines, or I don't know. Um,
I'm
and they
looking.
look, are you looking them up?
Well, I'm looking
They
at
look like railroad
engraved.
tracks in the stone, in like rock.
Yes.
Are they cart lines or cart? I don't know. I feel like there's a C in there for these lines.
Yeah, this is talking about what you were already talking about, the red ochre like spiral and floral patterns on the walls and the
Right.
ceilings and
Yeah. So
uh
they have they have them in a few places, and it looks like something very heavy sunk into the rock, like a very heavy wagon, let's say, sunk into the rock. And so they look like wheel lines or like railroad
okay,
tracks.
like
Okay.
tracks. Yeah,
But they're in the rock, which means that they must have been sculpted in the rock, but
right,
there's mystery around them. They're not sculpted in the rock. So then people are like, so what's so heavy to leave these lines? And they're, it looks like they drag something, and they're kind of near the sea, high up on the mountain, but near the sea, or the hill, because they don't have mountains in Malta. But and it looks like they were dragging something, and then they end. The lines end. So they have no beginning sense, like there's no origin point and no end. So they're like, so there's no explanation. So people are like, yeah, it looks like they dragged something or were wheeling something across.
right,
Okay, but either something had to be so heavy that it dug into the rock. We don't have stuff like that even today. What is that?
right.
Or they dug them in there in order to wheel something. Why would they dig them in the rock? You could just wheel something. So
Yeah.
it's a weird mystery that is
And where
on.
where is that?
They are across Malta. I'm gonna look them up right now too. They're across Malta. I'm gonna see what they're called. Um, I'm gonna put cart lines in Malta. Let's see.
Where
Uh,
is this article
yes.
also mentions
So they're called,
Zagra Circle on Gozo Island?
yeah, Gozo Island's really cool. I haven't, the Ziggurat Circle. Okay, so these are called cart ruts in Malta. They're
Oh,
mysterious
cart ruts. Okay, that makes sense.
mysterious cart tracks or cart ruts of Malta. Yeah. So they say that there's over there, you can find them in over 150 different locations. Yeah. So they have no idea what they are, what they're for.
Maybe it's how they move those megalithic rock structures from one place to another.
That's what people say, but
But since
they're
there's no
so
seeming
deep,
origin point or end,
and
it, it's
it's
weird.
weird. It's like, because if you have something, like if you have a cart itself
Right,
or wheels, why do you need to dig this in the ground? You don't need to do that. It's
right.
weird, right? So they look like grooves, like I said, like almost like two grooves in the rock itself. Um, so they're like, yeah, maybe they did use them. Who knows? Yeah. No historical cart that we know of was high enough for this to be useful. Some pair of the tracks are uneven. Some are so deep that they make transportation impossible.
Wow.
Yeah. They don't follow paths. They don't connect to settlements. They don't lead to or from anywhere else. There is no convincing hypothesis why there isn't any wear and tear caused by the animals pulling the carts. Nothing, nothing, nothing.
Right.
Yeah. Some of them are at a 45-degree angle, which of course you can't transport anything at a 45-degree angle. So
Right.
they might not be for carts at all. Yeah. But yeah. So they're like so fast, they're mind-blowing because you're
Yeah.
standing there. It's like, and if you look at the images, you're standing there, you can see them. It seems simple. And then you start thinking about, well, what purpose would they have? And what would go through them? And blah, blah, blah. And then your mind just blows because you're like, this makes no sense. What are these things? What could they have been used for?
Right.
It's like the simplest thing, but it's 5,000 years ago. What were they doing? Anyways, it's fascinating. I don't know. I don't know. And so I could see why people begin to talk about like supernatural things or alien things or UFO things or things like that, because the level of lack of explanation
Right.
is so wide, that, and lack of evidence,
Hmm.
that you have to ask yourself what maybe these things serve a purpose that is even beyond the human experience.
Right. Right. I think
Right.
that's highly likely. I think
Yeah.
that so much of our basis of spirituality as a whole is informed by these metaphysical events that I think people before us did have.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, but with each generation of us, we became further and further detached from the metaphysical
Yes.
world, just as we become more and more and more detached from the land itself,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Um, I mean, we've kind of been on this collision course since the dawn of agriculture,
Right.
right? And especially agriculture that then brought in trade and wealth and greed and all those other things.
Yep.
Um, like I keep hoping that when I die, I get to come back as, a hunter-gatherer. When in a time when we were all hunter-gatherers, right?
Exactly.
But of course, I
Exactly.
want to travel with the Sami and the
Right.
reindeer, right? I want
Right.
to follow the ancient trackways and ley
That
lines
sounds
and
awesome.
all of that.
Yeah.
That's what I want my next life to be. But then I imagine that when I die, the goddess is going to appear before me and just be like, "Yeah, this isn't going to be anything like what you thought. It's going to be hard, and there are going to
And
be
cold.
trials." And
Yes. 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 I would love to come back um in the time of the Palace of Knossos, and just be part of the family living there. Yeah. The Minoans and Knossos are very I don't know, fascinating to me.
I just
More and
want to
more
be
fascinating.
I just want to be in a goddess cult since there aren't any
Yeah.
now. Actually, that's not true. There are goddess cults in other parts of the world
Yeah.
that still exist today. I did like you were talking about earlier, like priestess of what? I so there's an organization called the Covenant of Hecate. Um, and I talked about this in my podcast about the Shekinah and Sophia and the Asherah because she's one of the authors of this book that I bought like 15 years ago about the Shekinah.
Mm-hmm.
So she is the one that started this Covenant of Hecate that's based in New York. Like they have a temple building and everything.
Nice.
And I had to take very specific steps to become like a dedicant of Hecate.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but but I think because she's been doing what she's been doing for so long and obviously has done a lot of her own academic research, her rituals are based in ancient history, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so since we are so far divorced from the metaphysics of spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
that's how we wind up in these situations with a lot of people doing things that they don't understand. They don't
Yeah.
really get that they're working with forces that are
Yes.
beyond their control,
Yes.
you know, that
Yes.
they're asking for things unknowingly that will be delivered to them, whether they want it or not,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
So, um, so do you want to talk about the Chauvet cave, or do you have other things on your agenda today?
No, I think we covered the
No, how
Hypogeum.
is that possible?
You mean to talk
Um,
about, yeah. Yeah. No, I think we've covered the Hypogeum in depth and its mystery.
yes. And I've already forgotten. So the Chauvet cave is actually part of a much larger network of caves. Is that right?
This is my understanding. I've never been there, but it's on my list of places to visit. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Um, and it's one of the oldest, or has one of the oldest, what do you call it? Paintings, I guess, basically. In the
Right.
Neolithic
They're the
period.
oldest well-preserved cave paintings in the world.
Correct. This is what is my understanding. Yes. Yes.
So now that cave, and I think, I don't, did you talk about the Chauvet cave in the episode of on your podcast where you talked about
I did.
caves?
I did. Yes. Yes.
Because isn't it there that they figured out, or what they believe is that different generations of family worked on the same pieces of
That's
art?
right. That's right. That's where that is. Yes. And that's where they have the buffalo slash pubic triangle goddess combination.
Right. And the most famous part, like people know the Chauvet cave from the panel of horses, right? Is
That's right.
that right?
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
and
Yeah, it's
that has
interesting that actually that's the most famous part of it.
right, but really that whole structure has not just horses, but rhinoceros and large felines and horses and
That's
bison
right.
and reindeer,
Yep.
my
Yep.
personal favorite, as you
I think
know.
there's a leopard in there too, or
Mhm.
some type of a cat. Yeah, a lioness or a leopard in there. Yeah, or a jaguar.
Well, and I was reading that some of them have multiple legs, like they were in motion.
Mm.
They were trying to portray that in the art
Yep.
that they were in movement. And
Yep.
if you stood back, it looked like a large herd of animals
Yep.
crossing whatever.
Yep.
So isn't part of the visual the way the way the light is, like
The
the way the
light.
light is in the cave, so that
Uh,
some of it would appear as shadows on opposite walls. Do I have that right? I'm trying to remember where
that
I
I'm
read
not
that.
sure. I'm not sure about that actually. I guess it once again depends on if they have it set so that the light hits the cave in a certain way.
Right. I'm looking at an article from a website called Smart History, the Center for Public Art History.
Okay.
Visual elements. So, do we think, or do you think, or is there research about that cave being kind of a ritual space? Because don't they think that they didn't actually live there?
No, no. So I would not compare that cave, for example, to the Hypogeum in the same way.
Right.
So there doesn't seem to be an altar space. Well, actually, now that I say that, no, that's not true. They do believe that there was some type of like sacred space, but okay, so there's a few things that are problematic here because ancient peoples or Neolithic people spend so much time in caves just
Right.
as a place to both pray, paint, eat, space of protection from,
Right.
the weather, animals. So it's not like the Hypogeum in the sense that the Hypogeum seems to be built specifically as a temple slash burial site slash sacred
Right.
space. This is a natural cave, so it's naturally occurring. And they did like live here and eat here and whatever. And spent their time making art. So I guess that's the difference. So I wouldn't say it was like a temple site the way that we talked about the Hypogeum, but there may
Right.
have been, moments of prayer or moments of
Right.
meditation.
Because so this article from this Smart History website, who was written by somebody else with a PhD.
Yeah.
So not that that even necessarily means it's
Not
solid, right?
always, not always,
But
but it's
it
good
at
to
least
have that reference.
indicates that it's a trustworthy
Right.
reference.
Exactly.
So this person wrote that these spectacular cave paintings among the earliest that survive from throughout the world are already visually compelling and dense with possible meanings. The cave paintings remind us that art has been and continues to be involved in a spectrum of beliefs and practices, including formal religion, but also informal beliefs in the supernatural and even attempts to work magic. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there have been famous painters throughout history who talk about incorporating their spirituality into the art. But
Correct.
I would say, based on what's in the Chauvet cave, it seems more like they were just kind of documenting what they were seeing,
Yes.
right?
I mean, the overlapping of the buffalo and the pubic triangle, some scholars believe that it was first a goddess's body, and then
Hmm.
it sort of painted over in the shape of a buffalo as well. So there may have been some overlapping painting.
Mm,
So I do think that they're painting what they're seeing, but also I think there's a bit of an element of mysticism to it. Um,
right, right,
like less documentative, more interpretation, let's say, right? That sort
right,
of adds
right,
an element of the mystic in there. Yeah. Yeah. We're not sure. That's the thing. It's hard to interpret people's art sometimes because we don't know what purpose it serves. Is it a recording or is it an honoring?
right, right. So, just as I was saying further down in the article, she says, what does this cave have to do with religion? In assessing any work of art, we should always ask, what was this made for?
Right.
The
Right.
people who created such works did not live in the caves they decorated. They were
Mhm.
humid, stifling places, absolutely dark and without ventilation for fire. The
Okay.
caves
Okay.
then must have served a function other than shelter. They cannot be seen as prehistoric art galleries, as the works are highly inaccessible and because of the darkness, almost impossible to see. If
Well,
they were not there to be seen, what were they for?
I disagree with that because I think understanding that the person who's painting is clearly using a light source, fire.
Right,
So it would be understandable that others could come in using the same light source to look at the paintings.
right.
But I do agree in a sense that there is perhaps, like I said, something mystical about, or maybe it's just as simple as this is where it would have been best preserved. I mean, if you think
Right,
about it, logic dictates that you wouldn't put it outside in the environment,
right,
because at this point, art was so much work and rare. So
right,
you
right,
wouldn't put it somewhere where you knew it would be erased.
right,
So perhaps they put it in caves additionally because it would be best preserved in there for
right,
generations to come. And obviously generations took part in painting. So
right. Well, so this researcher, let me see what her
mhm,
name is. Dr. Dr. Asa Simon Mittman.
okay.
Okay.
Hmm.
Who I think his PhD is in religion, I think.
Okay.
Um, okay. So this researcher proposes that it is possibly, since so many early religions especially shamanic practices, were rooted in this kind of principle of animism,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this author suggests that they could have been used for shamanic practices
Mm.
using animistic worship, animal worship, totemic practices, work with their ancestors,
Yeah.
right? Which the theory of, you know, multiple generations
Yep.
working on the
Yep.
same
Yep.
pieces of art. That, I mean, that tracks, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he also points out that the images are mostly of animals that were not used for food. So they probably weren't tied to hunting magic, but might instead be connected with fertility or power. The great abundance of animals here and in other Paleolithic caves may suggest or be intended to magically invoke a fertile world that provides for the tribe so that they could reproduce.
Yeah.
It's an
I mean,
interesting
I think that's
theory,
an interesting theory.
right?
It's obviously clearly, hmm, I can't remember the word, but it's sort of a made up theory. But no one could know for sure. I
Right,
think, I mean, certainly, yes, certainly, I think he's correct in saying, or they're correct in saying, these are not animals used for food. Whether or not the reason I think people talk about fertility is because the bull, the buffalo bull, and the pubic triangle are old symbolic representations of masculine and feminine. So I
right,
think that might be correct. Um, the horses and some of the other paintings, I'm not sure.
right,
Perhaps if this was a horse tribe, then perhaps yes, horse fertility would be important in order
right,
to
right,
continue. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of like conjecture happening,
right,
right?
right. Well, and
But it's the way academics work. I mean, how do we know? I mean, there's no way we
right,
know,
right. These
right?
are all theories that may or may
Exactly.
not be able to be proven someday by
Exactly.
archaeological and anthropological evidence.
Yeah.
Um, but I think a lot of those early shamanic traditions and even other traditions throughout the world, not only were they more tied to the land, but because it was before a time of things that we could explain in the natural world, everything to them held kind of like a supernatural belief.
It's possible. It depends on how it
Well, just like so, okay, so they find all these figurines all over the world.
yeah.
Um, and at first we thought they were all goddess statuary,
Yeah.
but later discovered that, you know what, it might not be that. It might be because they were just in such awe of a woman's body to reproduce that
Right.
they created all these things of figures of women, not
Yeah.
necessarily a goddess. I mean,
Yes.
sure, some of them undoubtedly were,
Yes.
but that you can't make that wholesale assumption about every female figure that's ever been depicted,
It's
right?
very interesting because we have to assume like their intelligence. So did they
Right,
have supernatural knowledge or extraterrestrial knowledge?
right,
In that case, none of this would have been a surprise to them. Or
right.
were they part of a more sort of primitive mentality? And in that case, or have we lost the mystery? Have we lost the sense of mystery because we think science explains like so yeah, so I guess depends on the approach that we want to take. I don't know. Yeah.
Right. Well, and now, I mean, in today's landscape, there's a lot of discussion about the merging of science and spirituality, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because now we can do studies like especially in psychology and but the sciences behind that, like they like the first thing I ever read about that was the study that they did with MRI imaging of the brain. And
Mm,
they showed that that the areas of the brain that light up when
right.
you drink or take drugs, right? It's in that pleasure center. They're the same
Right.
areas that light up when people pray.
Right.
So but again, I think as you suggested often, a lot of these things were like they were intrinsic knowledge.
Right.
They didn't have to
Right.
read a journal article about so and so. They just
Right.
knew.
Right.
And like we were talking about earlier, like that feeling, that energetic feeling that you get in a sacred space. One of the things that I read when because I kind of arrived where I'm at through the path of witchcraft and
Right.
those kinds of traditions, right? And one of the things that I first that with it when I read it, it really resonated with me. I don't remember what book it was in, but the author said, I think it was probably in one of my Raven Grimassi books, probably What We Knew in the Night. And he said, remember when you look at the moon in
Mm-hmm.
awe and reverence, you can increase that awe and reverence by remembering that the moon that you are looking upon is the same moon that witches have been looking at for millennia.
Right.
And I've always
Right.
remembered that. And now I think about that when I look at the moon or the
Right.
sun or the trees or the
Same.
stars or
That's
whatever.
so funny. Same. I've been thinking about it more and more and more lately. Like every time I see a sunrise or a sunset, and I think this sun has been rising for millennia and millennia and trimillennia of time
Right.
every day. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
our brains really cannot fathom that amount of time. But every day, every day, every day, it does the same cycle. Like it,
Right.
yeah, it makes you feel quite small, I think, and it reminds you
Yes.
of like,
And right. And we see that play out on the, like on the land stage across the world, right? Man trying to control
right.
nature and sometimes with a modicum of success, but oftentimes failing.
Yes.
I remember when I read Janet, whatever her name is, I just put up a quote by her the other day when I read, or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't that book. When I read The Orchid Thief
Mm.
by Susan Orlean, when she talks about Florida, she talks about how Florida is always the continual battle of man versus nature, right? Because people are constantly finding crocodiles in their swimming pools and
Right.
small dogs being carried away by whatever swamp creature, right? I mean,
Right.
so yeah, so it's this constant battle of the
Yes.
natural ecology of the place and the
Right.
marshlands and all of that,
Yes.
with people trying to commodify that, and super interesting,
Yeah.
super
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. 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 I think it's fascinating. It's all fascinating. And yeah. And again, it's just a matter of like, how, we are now in a stage where we kind of have to reconsider the status of Neolithic intelligence,
Right, right,
or pre-Neolithic and post-Neolithic. I think it's the old approach of like, well, this was their primitive mind. Like when you walk into the Hypogeum, you're like, this is not a primitive mind. This is a
right.
very architecture.
Or the Chauvet Cave. I mean,
Right,
that
right,
art is very uses, I don't know, not an artist, but uses techniques
right,
that artists still use
right,
today, like
right,
that, many hooves or legs to simulate motion.
right, right,
How did they know that?
right,
How did they know that?
right, right.
Were they just painting and be like, so does it look like they're running? Right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I mean, we really just, there's so much that we don't know. But like you said, I don't think that we've lost the mystery. I just think we have to look a little bit harder for it. I had the car that I had before I drove this one had a bumper sticker on it that said it, and it had a galaxy image, and it said inspired by the mystery.
Yeah.
So, because that is what inspires me often,
Right,
right?
right, right. That's
I don't
true.
know. I think anybody practicing anything that's even remotely related to an ancient religion should know about the ancient religion.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Or the ancient practice or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
It's just
mean, whenever so for example, so I have started researching um, the rituals that were used by some of these ancient goddess cults because when I was a practicing witch, it was relatively easy for me to do research and find information about how that particular goddess was worshipped.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm looking for, was there, I mean, obviously we know about these ancient goddess cults, but were there people that believe, as I believe, right? Because I'm essentially a monotheist goddess worshiper,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And did that exist?
Yes.
I think I posted not that long ago in my little thing about queens that at one time Isis was the only goddess that was worshipped in all of Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think that exists, but that's kind of my current personal research project is because Carla, I would really like to claim a religion. I would love to call myself something,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean,
because monotheistic goddess worshiper is kind of long and has a lot of syllables, you
yes.
know.
Yes. So I think in a in my just my in my interpretation of that, I think that you can, so just like for me, for example, with Artemis, you can have a primary goddess
Right, and mine
that
is
is
Ellen of
sort
the
of
Ways,
right.
right?
Um, but I
But
think the nature of the goddess is that she is many things, just like the nature of women, that you're
right,
multi-layered.
that's
And
my
so,
whole diamond god theory,
right,
right?
right. Right. So I don't know that monotheism works because it's exclusionary in a way. It goes, I only worship this goddess and no other. And that can't, that's, as a goddess worshiper, you have moods when you're like, yeah, tonight it feels like this kind of a mood. Or a goddess just comes into your life based on
Right, right.
but I think, yeah, I think you could have a primary. I don't know if that's the right word. Maybe there's a better word. Um,
That's what I
like
say. I say that
queen
Ellen
or
of the Ways
monarch
is,
or
I say that Ellen of the Ways is my patron deity,
right,
right?
right.
I mean, she's representative of the whole,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah.
she is the goddess with whom I've created the strongest and most meaningful relationship with,
Right.
right? But I
Right.
still get that she's part of a much greater whole.
Right.
And I guess I see monotheism as all that really means, at least in my worldview, is that there's a singular source. And that is what
Right.
I believe. That
Right.
is what I believe.
Right.
Um, that's why I like it when I read about what are considered primordial goddesses,
Right.
right?
Right.
The ones that have always been here, not just appeared as a result of popular religious culture,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. I think we all have that, the knowledge that there is one source, one energy, one entity,
Right.
um, and the oneness of it all. And I think, yeah, out of that oneness, we have all of these maybe personalized sort of, I mean, I suppose gods could be almost like people, although that is a very organic brain interpretation, but
Right.
in the sense that there could be lots of different incarnations or different
Right. Right.
aspects of the divine. I suppose in some way the source can be whatever it wants to be.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we are one with the source is also interesting because it means we are then part of the divine.
Right.
We are divine. People say
Right.
that.
And I believe that too, right?
Yeah.
Like the goddess is something outside of me, but she also lives within me.
Right.
And
Right.
that's how I learned to trust my intuition because I trust that part of me that is
Right.
of her. Does that make
Makes sense.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and what I see lacking is that kind of awe-inspiring reverence, right?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
see people turn to whatever religion, and when they pray to that God, it's really just about fulfilling their wishes.
Yes.
And I'm over here going, you know what, Goddess is not my errand boy.
Right.
You know what I mean? She wants, I think, and deserves reverence and dedication and religion, right? Or
Yes.
she wants to be worshipped. She's not gonna get mad at me if I don't,
Yes.
but
Yes.
I really like that Thomas Merton poem that essentially starts with, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I think that the desire to please you pleases you,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I agree. 100%. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great start for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Like I said,
Yeah.
the divine is not my errand boy,
Yeah.
for sure. Or Santa
Mhm.
Claus. I
Right,
can't just
right.
pray to my for my wishes to be granted,
Right.
right? I'm part of the equation. That's part of what having a relationship with her means I don't just sit on my laurels and expect her to do everything. Like I have
Mm,
to show up and do my part, like go to
yes.
therapy, work a program. You know what I mean?
That's right.
It's
That's
yeah.
right. Yeah. That's
So
right. That's right. I agree. Yeah, I think that fits well. Yeah.
this was good. I told you we'd get a
Yes.
whole episode out of the Hypogeum, and
Yes.
I'm giving you trying to be your career manager in the meantime.
I'm gonna sit
and,
with that for a bit
and
and
fact
think
check
about
my
it.
own spiritual life. Right? Hey, thanks for listening. New episodes drop every Saturday, so keep tuning in. You can also find the Girlfriend God on social media, both on TikTok and Instagram, hashtag the Girlfriend God, hashtag the Girlfriend God podcast. Again, thanks for listening, liking, sharing, and following. The Girlfriend